Welcome to Part 2 of Herbert Has Been Murdered. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 6. 0:32 p.m. Pictures in Dust. Lieutenant Williams looked at the pale face, puzzled for a moment. "What do you mean, Christian?" he asked. "Honestly, Lieutenant, I mean exactly what I say." "But that's impossible." Christian pressed further. "It's sacrilege," he insisted. "Nonsense," Lieutenant Williams replied sharply. "You've simply misunderstood Dr. Jameson. It's possible that Mr. Franklin wasn't dead after all, just caught in some state of catalepsy. No one can bring the dead back to life, Christian." "I'm glad to hear you say that, sir." "Then let's go in." "Do I have to go back in there, too?" "You must. Forget that you're a superstitious Irishman, and remember that you're a police officer. Cops, as you've been told more times than you can count, should be noble, firm, and always cool, calm, and collected." "Come on, you're joking." "Not at all." "Well, I'll try, Lieutenant, but geez." "But nothing," Lieutenant Williams said as he opened the door to Franklin's room. The sight was shockingly bright. All the shades were drawn from the lamps, and the furnishings were starkly illuminated under the harsh white light. Bottomfield was alone, standing near the bed where Franklin lay, looking at the body in a state of stunned confusion. Lieutenant Williams joined him. A blanket was drawn up to Franklin's chin, and the exposed face looked waxen, still, very much like a dead man. "This is the strangest thing, Williams." "What is, Chief?" "They're saying there's a possibility this man isn't really dead. Jameson plans to operate." "Operate? But Dr. Jameson admitted himself that the heart stopped beating when he tested with a stethoscope. What kind of operation?" "Jameson intends to inject adrenaline into the heart muscle." "I wonder how effective that really is." "Well, unless Franklin been poisoned, both the medical examiner and Jameson seem to think there's a chance. They believe it can't hurt to try anyway." "It seems a bit absurd to me, but it brought to mind that case in Queens. You might have read about it, where a man was declared dead for 6 hours and then revived. Naturally, the authorities claimed he wasn't truly deceased, just as they now suspect that Franklin might not actually be dead. No one can return from the grave." Lieutenant Williams shot a neutral glance at Christian, who was doing his best to position himself as close to the hallway door as possible. "They say," Bottomfield continued, "that adrenaline has been used sporadically for years. Jameson mentioned they often try it when a baby is born dead. Sometimes it gets the heart going again, and the baby survives." Lieutenant Williams shrugged. "If it works with Franklin, it will certainly make things easier for us," he replied. "He could give a statement and file charges himself. Where is everyone?" "The medical examiner and Jameson are downstairs making calls and setting up for the operation. My team has wrapped up and returned to headquarters. There was no sign of forced entry, so it appears to be an inside job, if there even was a crime. Honestly, Williams, if it weren't for your idea about robbery as a motive, or that note that could be seen as a threat, I might disregard the whole thing. It's another story if the adrenaline doesn't do its job, and an autopsy reveals poison or something else." "Did you learn much from Mrs. Franklin?" "Enough to be curious for more details. Do you want me to share?" "Later, once I have to start working on the case. Do you want to continue overseeing this?" "Yes." "Go ahead. Request any outside resources you think we should look into for you. I'll send you a report on the brushes and comb as soon as they're done with them downtown." "Are you leaving, Chief?" "There's no point in my staying around, Williams. We don't have a case yet that requires any involvement from central office. According to those 2 specialists downstairs, we don't even have a body. There might have been a robbery, but it falls under your precinct, so take charge. I'll find out from the medical examiner when he returns about how the operation went and whether there will be an autopsy. If poisoning is confirmed and no one has been held accountable by then, I'll dive back into it. I assume you'll make sure the people in the house are thoroughly checked out." "Of course, Chief." "I'll head out then. Good luck, Williams." "Thank you, Chief." Bartonfield exited the room and closed the door behind him. "I bet he has a date," Christian remarked. "He'd stick around even if he had 20 dates, if he thought it was necessary," Lieutenant Williams replied. "Well, I wish I had a date. You'll end up with an entire vacation if you don't get your act together. I'm going to check that cupboard now that Franklin isn't in it." Even a cupboard seemed better to Christian than sitting in the room. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked with almost desperate politeness. "No, Christian, you can stay right where you are." "Oh, very well, sir." Lieutenant Williams grabbed a straight-backed chair and took it into the cupboard with him. He held a deep respect for the central office staff, but felt their work was too methodical to allow for interesting digressions or time spent on side trails that could lead to valuable discoveries. He had no criticism in his mind at all. He admired the system that had been built and the efficient functioning of its various units and departments. He knew well that their successes outnumbered their failures. Yet it lacked that intangible, time-consuming, and occasionally costly element known as the personal touch. At its best, it resembled a machine. There was also a degree of carelessness woven into the overall plan. In many instances, details were overlooked, and some things were completely missed. This was hardly surprising when considering the personnel were largely drawn from the ranks of intelligent men. Intelligent, yes, but not necessarily specialists, nor could anyone fairly expect them to be. As they worked on the case, they operated on two distinctly separate but parallel tracks. One group of specialists focused on the technical and chemical examination of physical evidence and clues found at the crime scene, just as the brushes and comb would soon be analyzed by the right people over at Central Office. The second group dealt with the human element, interviewing witnesses, tracking down the victim's friends and acquaintances. It was a large and capable organization that would reach out to every connection in the victim's life within the city, striving to uncover possible motives and identify potential suspects or groups of suspects. Once they gathered sufficient evidence from the technical team to build a case against one or more suspects, arrests would be made or the suspects called in for questioning. Depending on the personalities and status of the suspects, one of the various methods associated with the feared third degree would be used to elicit a confession. After that, the work of Central Office would be complete, and the case would pass to the prosecutor. Lieutenant Williams was relieved that, in this instance, the Chief of Homicide had deemed it unnecessary to activate the second group until more concrete developments arose. The case intrigued him. Mrs. Franklin caught his interest. Her striking beauty, her intellect, her contradictions, along with Smithers and Nancy Norwich, three women who promised to satisfy his almost overwhelming curiosity about the motivations behind human behavior. The talk of reviving Franklin and having him make a statement, perhaps that could happen. But until then, he preferred to think of Franklin as a body, the case as a clear homicide, and the potential suspects right in the house. Lieutenant Williams turned his focus to the cupboard. Shelves lined the back, the lowest one at head height for a man. Various suits of clothes hung from beneath this bottom shelf. He climbed down from the chair and pointed his flashlight at the top of it. All he found was a thick layer of dust. A rush of satisfaction washed over him when he noticed the clear marks where the dust had been wiped away recently, almost as if someone had intentionally brushed their hands against it. It tied in with the grimy cake of soap. Bartonfield hadn't mentioned the marks. It was clear the men from the Central Office had missed them. They had merely noticed the empty shelves and left it at that. Lieutenant Williams felt a little pleased with himself and thought gravely that it was time to make a deduction. For a moment, he entertained the idea of that strange and sinister Oriental influence that often appears in the finest murder cases, especially those involving Christians. A shadowy figure swathed in grey, their coffee-coloured skin topped with a white turban, obsessed with the fanatical rituals that somehow involve dust. This breath-stealing villain would surely be caught by the brilliant detective due to the fiend's strange fascination with dust. Was there such a mystery to unravel here? He quickly chastised himself. He knew there was not. But instead of such a neat and compelling deduction, what was he left with? He stared at the dust and began to envision stories in it, a figure lurking in fear or hatred, knowing that Franklin was about to open the cupboard door. What, in the name of humor, could be done? The figure feared being recognized. Was there no way to hide? No, wait, there was the dust. The hands were stained, and through those hands the face would be revealed. "Ain't there anything I can do for you, Lieutenant?" Lieutenant Williams sighed and stepped down from the chair. "Yes, Christian," he replied. "You can move this chair over by the hall door. Then you can take a seat." "Very well, Lieutenant," Christian replied bitterly. "But when you're tucked away in that cupboard, it feels like it's just me and that lifeless body in the room." "Then sit where you can't see it." "Good grief, Lieutenant, I don't even need to see it. Just the thought of it gives me the creeps." "You'll be out the door, Christian, if you don't get yourself together." "Fine, sir, but if you come out and find me passed out, don't say I didn't warn you." "I wouldn't dream of blaming you, Christian." Lieutenant Williams stepped back into the cupboard. He inspected the corner where Franklin had been slumped. The suits hanging there had settled back into a semblance of order. He took his time checking the pockets, finding them empty. The rumpled linings indicated they had been rifled through in haste before. Maybe the central office team had done it, but he wasn't too sure. They usually focused on the belongings taken from Franklin during the attack. It caught his attention that the suits Franklin had leaned against showed signs of being searched too. This supported his theory that the attacker had been rummaging through them when caught off guard by Franklin's sudden entrance into the bedroom. It also reinforced his idea about the clever disguise made from the dust on the shelf above. Shoes lined the low shelf at the bottom of one side, while hat boxes occupied a matching shelf on the other. Lieutenant Williams dismissed the idea that the specific hat he was after, the one Franklin had been wearing or trying to grab at the moment of the attack, would be in a box. It might be in the cupboard that Mrs. Franklin mentioned downstairs in the entrance hall. The thought nagged at him insistently, and he decided it was important enough to head down and check. Christian struggled to stop himself from grabbing Lieutenant Williams's arm as they stood by the hall door. "Are you really going to leave me here all by myself, Lieutenant?" "Honestly, Christian, I am." With that, Lieutenant Williams stepped out. Christian cast one last hopeless glance at his charge, the lifeless figure, then crossed his fingers tightly and sat down. "I just knew it," he grumbled under his breath. This case was going to turn out to be one of those printed damn things. Chapter 7. 1:01 p.m. Banked fires. The corridor was empty. Lieutenant Williams made his way to the top of the staircase and glanced down into the entrance hall. He spotted the broad back of Officer O'Brien, who stood guard at the door. O'Brien's nose was pressed against the glass, his eyes presumably focused on the street beyond the bronze grille. As Lieutenant Williams descended, he pondered the eerie silence of the house. Not a sound could be heard. There was a palpable air of anticipation, as if the stillness was waiting for something to erupt into chaos. "What are you doing pressing your nose against the glass, O'Brien?" he called out. The young officer turned and flashed a broad grin. "It's those newspaper fellows, sir," he replied. "They're all in a tizzy over what the medical examiner just told them." Lieutenant Williams felt a slight groan escape him. "When did this happen, O'Brien?" "Just a moment ago, sir. Out there in the vestibule." The medical examiner went into the vestibule. "Indeed, Lieutenant," and the last of those reporters dashed off down the street like a startled rabbit. They were desperate for pictures, but he wouldn't let them take any. "Is that so?" Lieutenant Williams replied, feigning surprise. "Absolutely. Except for a quick flash or two, he allowed them to snap of himself." "Were you the little birdie, O'Brien?" "Excuse me, Lieutenant." "Did you chirp over his shoulder while the flash bulbs went off?" "Well, sir, I may have had the door ajar a bit. I was just explaining to the reporters that they couldn't come in without your say-so when the medical examiner showed up and went outside to calm them down. A modern martyr throwing himself to the lions. Aside from the tea party, O'Brien, has anything happened down here? Not a thing, sir. Have any of the servants been lurking about? Just one old woman in black, and she must be 7 feet tall if she's an inch. She came halfway down the stairs, shot me a dirty look, then marched back up as stiff as a board. Her bonnet was firmly on her head. You don't know who she was, I take it. Not a clue, sir. She looked like she could be the housekeeper. That's likely. By the way, O'Brien, what did the medical examiner tell the crew? Lieutenant, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I had already told them that the boss upstairs was dead and foul play was suspected, and they were frantic for more from the medical examiner. I'll be damned if he didn't give it to them. What did he say, O'Brien? Well, sir, it sounded like crinoline, the stuff the missus talks about with old dresses. That was it. That was enough, sir. Crinoline, he said, looking all wise. Then he added, for now, boys, no more, and they scattered like they were running from the devil himself. All right, O'Brien, just stay where you are. Lieutenant Williams wandered around the entrance hall, but didn't find any hats aside from his own and the medical examiner. He knew Dr. Jameson's hat was still upstairs in Franklin's bedroom. He discovered the cupboard Mrs. Franklin had mentioned, but there was no hat there. The thought was becoming an obsession. It increasingly seemed that the attacker might have taken the hat and worn it out of the house. But why would the attacker leave the house? And what had happened to the attacker's own hat? Only time, or perhaps Franklin himself, would reveal the truth. From a reception room that opened off the entrance hall, he caught the low murmur of Dr. Jameson and the medical examiner deep in conversation. He walked past the door without a glance and headed upstairs. An old woman in black, towering as tall as 7 feet if she was an inch. Her bonnet sat squarely on her head. And her bonnet, Lieutenant Williams murmured to himself, was indeed on her head. He climbed another flight of stairs to the 3rd floor. A door at the far end of the hallway stood open, spilling light into the dim corridor. He approached it and peered inside. A tall, thin woman occupied a chair in front of a fireplace where a few coals flickered weakly. She was astonishingly gaunt, her silhouette like a pencil, rigidly supporting a stern face beneath a smooth helmet of steel-grey hair. Black taffeta enveloped her, clinging tightly to her flat, narrow form and revealing 2 slender arms that ended in tapering, sensitive hands, reminiscent of an emotional ascetic. Lieutenant Williams tapped on the doorframe. The woman didn't flinch. Only her head turned to face him, and her eyes were a striking contradiction, black orbs shining coldly in a pale white sky. Excuse me, I am Lieutenant Williams from the police. Are you, by any chance, the housekeeper? Her voice carried the tones of New England, low and almost husky, slightly harsh, stripped of all inflection. Yes, Lieutenant, I am Mrs. Quammen. May I come in? Thank you, please don't stand. I'll only stay a moment or two if that's all right. He pulled up a chair to sit before the fireplace next to her. Settling down, he simply observed the oddly artificial calm of Mrs. Quammen's hands, clasped tightly. There's no point in asking me questions, Lieutenant, because I have nothing to say. Her tone was as cold and clear as the brisk winds that sweep through the rugged mountains of Vermont. Lieutenant Williams warmed his hands near the flickering coals and smiled politely. And I, he replied, have absolutely nothing to ask. That is a lie. There was no malice in her response. It was merely a dispassionate observation, spoken flatly by the remarkable figure dressed in black who sat beside him. Lieutenant Williams burst into a nervous laugh, discarding his mask of indifference as he openly studied Mrs. Quammen with genuine interest. Her eyes were not like distant planets. They were more like smouldering fires with hot coals buried beneath the ash. I wouldn't be surprised, he remarked, if your ancestors hailed from Salem. A flicker of curiosity stirred in her gaze. Why do you say that, sir? Because there's a hint of witch burning in your eyes. Mrs. Quammen slowly shook her head. I would never presume to usurp God's rights. Yet you would support it, Mrs. Quammen. I would take joy, sir, in eradicating any evil or, her tone hardened, any wicked thing. Even if it meant taking the life of a person. Her gaze remained steady. Yes, Lieutenant, even if it meant taking a life. She continued calmly and without emotion. Her words felt like stones chipped from a solid quarry, carrying a weight of strong beliefs and unyielding purpose. That's why you see no tears from me, sir, despite the tragedy that has befallen this household. Lieutenant Williams sensed something was off. If she considered Franklin's situation tragic, then she hardly saw his death as a retaliatory act from her undeniably resolute guard. Tragic, he echoed softly. A tragedy, sir, for those who cannot see the truth. He hoped she wouldn't become too metaphorical. He struggled to understand. It's hard on Mrs. Franklin, he offered. For a moment he thought she might soften. That poor young thing, she said, her voice almost tender for a moment. That beautiful young child, what a bitter end for the journey of her troubled heart. He cautiously ventured further. But isn't she really better off, don't you think? She will never fully grasp the gift of her release. Suddenly, Mrs. Quammen's incredibly thin frame quivered with emotion as she added, From that loathsome, that filthy beast. Oh, come now, Mrs. Quammen, no man is as terrible as that, she said, her eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. You didn't know him, Lieutenant, the way we did. We, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Quammen. Indeed, sir, myself, and the staff in my employ. You found him unlikable, overbearing, perhaps. Mrs. Quammen's gaze remained fixed on the glowing coals, as if their fiery glow reflected the fury boiling inside her. I found him to be such a man, Lieutenant, that I am relieved to hear of his demise. But Mrs. Quammen, he isn't dead. For a moment he thought she might faint, and he instinctively leaned forward to catch her. She rose unsteadily, but rejected his offer of support. If you will excuse me, sir, I think I shall lie down. There has been quite a lot of strain. With a slight bow, she turned and disappeared through a door leading to an inner room. Lieutenant Williams paused, listening for a moment at the closed door. He couldn't tell if the muffled sound that drifted out was strange laughter or a sob. Chapter 8 1:28 p.m. Mrs. Franklin screams. The twists and turns of the situation were becoming more complex. Lieutenant Williams noted them as he made his way down the stairs and along the corridor toward Franklin's room. Mrs. Franklin herself and the stoic Mrs. Quammen had both been partially investigated. Then there was Smithers, whose penetrating gaze had hinted at unspoken truths. And what about Nancy Norwich, and the unknown man with whom Mrs. Franklin had shared tea that afternoon? He pushed open the door to Franklin's room and stepped inside. Preparations for the surgery were nearly complete. Dr. Jameson and the medical examiner stood beside the bed, while two trained nurses in uniforms, competent middle-aged women, hovered nearby, seeming somewhat distanced in their own world, which was clearly separate from that of the laypeople. Christian, looking more forlorn than ever, remained stiffly in a chair near the doorway. He continued to gaze upward at the pristine white ceiling, almost with obsessive focus. Lieutenant Williams took a seat on the edge of a long mahogany chest, positioned near the farthest window from the bed, and watched Dr. Jameson intently. He felt a queasy sensation rising in him, and hoped he wouldn't embarrass himself by fainting. He had seen countless accidents and stabbings, but he had never been present for a surgical operation, and it was unnerving. Even if Franklin wasn't technically dead, he certainly appeared to be. Terms like suspended animation and catalepsy were appropriate in theory, but witnessing them in reality was quite disturbing. Lieutenant Williams felt confident in identifying corpses, and he wondered why Dr. Jameson was stalling, hesitating. No, he was leaning in now, ready to inject adrenaline into Franklin's heart. The response was immediate. With the stethoscope, Dr. Jameson detected Franklin's heart starting to beat again, growing steadily stronger. Under the bright lights, a faint blush began to spread across Franklin's skin. Lieutenant Williams noticed it and instinctively wet his dry lips with his tongue. "Doctor." Jameson straightened up and handed the stethoscope to the medical examiner. "Franklin is alive," he said. No one had noticed Mrs. Franklin standing in the doorway, nor had they realized the door was even open. It was a desperate scream, and the way she collapsed to the floor that jolted everyone into awareness of her presence. Dr. Jameson nodded to one of the nurses. With her help, he lifted Mrs. Franklin and carried her out of the room. The rest of the onlookers remained frozen, still caught in the lingering impact of that piercing scream. It was barely a moment before Dr. Jameson returned. He made his way straight to Lieutenant Williams. "I've given Mrs. Franklin a sedative to keep her calm for the night," he said. "It was unacceptable for her to be here. That guard at the door should have ensured it was kept closed." "Absolutely unacceptable, Doctor. I think we all stood entranced watching you," Lieutenant Williams replied. "And regardless of the law, she cannot be questioned or disturbed until I say so." "However, Doctor, that is the law. You certainly have the authority over your patient." "I don't want authority. I'm just as eager as anyone to uncover the truth about this situation, if there's more to uncover." "Franklin hardly would have crawled into a cupboard to have a stroke, would he, Doctor?" "No." Dr. Jameson regarded Lieutenant Williams with a thoughtful gaze for a moment. "Unless he was hiding in there to overhear something, and indeed did overhear something that caused a stroke," he said. Lieutenant Williams concluded that this investigation was revealing unexpected layers to its complexity. The medical examiner approached them, briefly commending Dr. Jameson on the success of his operation. He assured Lieutenant Williams that the homicide chief would receive a complete report on Franklin's recovery, and assumed that from this point on, the case would fall under Lieutenant Williams's jurisdiction. Lieutenant Williams would handle any potential charges of robbery or assault that might arise from it. He said goodbye and left the room, fully intending to head straight home to bed, which he did after fulfilling his promise to report to Bottomfield. Dr. Jameson raised an eyebrow inquisitively. "So, there will be charges, Lieutenant?" "That depends largely on Franklin, Doctor. Now that he's revived, he should be able to tell us who attacked him or what caused him such distress." "I hope so. Is there any doubt?" Dr. Jameson took a moment to gather his thoughts. "Of course there's a doubt," he replied. "While it's true that Franklin has regained consciousness, it's impossible to say definitively that he will remain so, and even if he does regain full awareness, there's a possibility he might choose not to speak at all. What will you do then, Lieutenant?" "I'll pack up and disappear, Doctor." Dr. Jameson looked down his long nose at the polished tips of his shoes for a moment. "And if Franklin doesn't recover consciousness," he said softly, "what will you do then?" "You'd be surprised at the things I could do." Dr. Jameson's gaze shot up sharply at the lieutenant's flippant tone. "I must stress that Mrs. Franklin is not to be disturbed," he insisted. "She won't be, Doctor. Nurse Vickers, who aided me in bringing her in, will stay with Mrs. Franklin throughout the night. 2 day nurses will arrive in the morning, one for her, if needed, and certainly one for Franklin. I cannot emphasize enough the seriousness of his condition." Dr. Jameson waved his hand in exasperation. "I wish I knew him better, specifically, who his friends are." "He never mentioned them to you?" "Never. He seems to be an unusually reserved man, with an almost excessive need for privacy regarding his personal affairs." Dr. Jameson's demeanor turned serious. Mentally, he wagged a finger at Lieutenant Williams. He mustn't experience any further shock. There must be nothing that can shock him when, and if he regains consciousness. He turned to the nurse for a moment. "Please, Miss Murrow, put those lampshades back on and turn off the ceiling lights. Now, Lieutenant, back to Franklin. Since she's under the influence of the narcotic I gave her, it's best that his wife isn't here. I truly wish she could be. I want the first face he sees to be someone familiar, someone he loves. His mind, you see, will resume functioning exactly where it left off. At least, that's my conclusion." And that was in shock. Yes, Lieutenant, indeed it was shock or great fear. We cannot underestimate the importance of helping him through this safely. Personally, I'll stay here at the house tonight, and Nurse Murrow will call me if Franklin shows any signs of waking up. That might not happen until morning. I hope it does, though, because by then the narcotics effects will have faded, and Mrs. Franklin can be here with him. One of the staff might know of a friend, Lieutenant Williams suggested. I assume you'd like a friend to sit with him during the night. Dr. Jameson replied firmly, it's almost essential that there be someone. The mental and emotional aspects are crucial in this situation. There's just one more thing I'd like to arrange, Doctor. Of course, what is it? I want to have a couple of men stationed in the bathroom all night. They can sit on chairs just inside the door, where they can keep an eye on the bed without Franklin seeing them. He shouldn't know they're there. What could possibly be the reason for that? It's quite simple, Doctor. When Franklin wakes up, he'll be able to tell us who caused him that shock, one strong enough to nearly kill him, one that would have taken his life if we hadn't found him tonight, and if, he added thoughtfully, Mrs. Franklin. Franklin hadn't allowed her doubts to linger. But why are there men in the bathroom? Because I want to avoid any chance of a repeat occurrence before Franklin can make his statement. Dr. Jameson pursed his lips, looking thoughtful. I see, he replied. You're worried that the same person might try to get to him again and, well, silence him before he can speak. Something like that, Doctor. Lieutenant Williams adopted a more formal tone. As the physician overseeing this case, do you have any objections to my stationing the two men in the bathroom? Only if Franklin can't see them and won't be disturbed in any way. Then it's decided. I assume you'll have a nurse here at all times. Of course. In that case, I'll ask her to keep this hallway door locked from the inside. She can open it if anyone knocks, and my men will watch whoever comes in. Your precautions seem excessive, Lieutenant. And so does the case. I'm heading downstairs now to see if I can gather any information from the servants about his friends. I can let them know you're here, if you think that's necessary, in case something needs to be prepared. Thank you, Lieutenant. Not at all, Doctor. Lieutenant Williams stepped outside and found the maid, Jane, sitting on a chair in the hallway near the stairs, visibly shaken. An empty tray lay on the floor beside her. When she noticed him, she quickly picked up the tray and stood. I'm so upset, sir, she said, her voice trembling. So very upset. Has something frightened you? Frightened? Goodness, sir. What with bringing the dead back and the missus slipping into a coma, if it weren't for those 3 officers at the front doors, I'd be out of this house right now, and so would the rest of us. How many of the rest of you are there? Well, including the housekeeper, there are 8 of us, sir. Lieutenant Williams was now quite convinced that the Franklins must be multimillionaires. All women. Except for the houseman and the chauffeur. And do they sleep in the house? The chauffeur doesn't, sir. He has an apartment for himself, his wife, and their 3-year-old daughter, Katie, over the garage on East 66th Street. Have you all been in service here for long? Not really, sir, except for Smithers and the housekeeper. I've been here a month, and the others, not more than 2 or 3. And Smithers has been Mrs. Franklin's maid for several years, I take it. Yes, ever since she came here from England, sir. Smithers is English. Just you wait, sir, and I'll tell you she's of the aristocracy, no less. Lieutenant Williams pondered this seriously. It wasn't impossible. Many English families were devastated financially by the war, and their children had scattered like sparrows in search of food. Are you sure of this? He asked. Absolutely, sir. It's common knowledge. The housekeeper herself told me. Lieutenant Williams changed direction suddenly. I wonder if you can tell me who Mr. Franklin's close friends were, he inquired. Well, sir, quite a few people have visited the madam from time to time, and a few for Mr. Franklin too, but I can't say how close they were. But didn't he ever talk about his friends? Not in my presence, sir. I'm just one of the downstairs staff. Perhaps Smithers would know. She often stays in the room with the madam and Mr. Franklin, even when they're quarrelling fiercely that, goodness gracious. Now, said Lieutenant Williams softly. Married couples often argue. There's nothing strange about that. Indeed, there isn't. I wonder if you could ask Smithers to come out here to see me. I will, sir. Oh, and could you also inform the necessary parties that Dr. Jameson intends to stay here all night, and please let them know where he is to sleep. Yes, sir. Jane approached the door of Mrs. Franklin's room and knocked. Nurse Vickers opened it slightly, blocking the entrance. Their voices were too quiet for Lieutenant Williams to hear, but he noticed the nurse step back into the room, saw Jane give her a nod, and soon after, Smithers came out toward him. You wanted to see me, Lieutenant. There was still an unsettling guard in her eyes, a whisper of secrets tightly held behind locked gates. I need you to explain, he said softly, why you made me say later back in Mrs. Franklin's room. I'm not sure I understand. And I think you do. Smithers took on an air of cool detachment. One is entitled to one's beliefs. Why do you despise Mrs. Franklin so much? She flinched as if he had struck her. Is that the reason you called for me? She asked. Lieutenant Williams himself averted his gaze. I wish, he said, that you would sit down. Chapter 9. 1:55 p.m. Queer Deeps. Smithers sat down in the chair that Jane had been using, his demeanor indifferent. Lieutenant Williams pulled another chair closer to her and began their conversation with the usual roundabout manner before getting to the point. I wanted to talk to you about Mr. Franklin, specifically about his condition, he said. He noticed her hands tense as he summarized what Dr. Jameson had told him. I understand, he continued, that Mrs. Franklin is under the effects of a narcotic and won't be available until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Dr. Jameson wants to avoid any risks, so we're reaching out to you. Her gaze seemed to penetrate right through him, as if his presence had been somehow rendered invisible. Mr. Franklin has very few friends, she remarked. You're taking that quite literally. Quite. His acquaintances are many, but they come and go. She focused on him again. Most of them are women. I doubt any of them would be suitable. Lieutenant Williams offered a slight smile. Not if their connections are so fleeting, their emotional connections, I mean. Exactly. Her demeanor remained cool as she asked, almost as an afterthought, would a man be acceptable? Why not? Because there's one man who Mr. Franklin often refers to as his best friend. Is he in town? He lives in a bachelor apartment on East 52nd Street. Do you have his address? It's written in the notebook next to the telephone in Mrs. Franklin's room. Lieutenant Williams adopted a more casual tone. A mutual friend, then. Not exactly. Is he your only suggestion? He is the only man I've heard Mr. Franklin mention in terms of friendship and closeness. Then we really have no other options. Smithers' smile conveyed nothing. No options. Have you ever met this man? His name is Mr. Thomas Hollander. I've never met him. Has anyone in the household seen him, to your knowledge? I can't say for sure. I don't know. One might ask. Lieutenant Williams recognized the sharp rise in her voice at the end of each sentence, a mannerism all too common among certain English folk when they wanted to be just a bit disagreeable. He felt a strong urge to strike back, even if it meant sacrificing his sense of chivalry. After all, he thought, he was merely living up to the stereotype of his profession. There was something uniquely personal between this woman and Franklin. If we can't reach Mr. Hollander, he said, would you consider taking the position yourself? He immediately regretted his words as he saw her face drain of color. It was startling how quickly blood could leave a person's cheeks. His own face burned painfully from the sting of her earlier slap. As he remained still, he noticed the strange fear lurking behind her bitter, wide eyes. It wasn't fear of the law. She had symbolically slapped that notion in his face with her boldness. It wasn't fear of what he or the authority he represented could inflict upon her, nor of what anyone could do to her. It was puzzling, as mysterious as the source of any intense emotional reaction, a feeling rooted not in the moment, but in her past. "May I offer my apologies?" he said. She snapped back to the present, her color returning in a series of bright waves. "I'm not usually so rude," she replied. "Nor are you usually subjected to insult. The fault lies with me." Her laugh was harsh and brittle. "On the contrary, Lieutenant, I'm quite familiar with insult." "Then why do you remain with Mrs. Franklin?" he asked softly. "Because some people, Lieutenant, find their happiness only in hell." "Martyrs." "Not quite martyrs," she corrected him. "Then what is it, exactly?" "It's a sort of sharing, a sharing of suffering, if you will." Vague, so very vague. Lieutenant Williams was becoming increasingly convinced that he would soon lose his grip on reality if the tangled complexities of the hearts and minds he had encountered in recent hours didn't soon align into something sensible. He found himself envying his more stoic colleagues on the force, who stuck to the solid terrain of hard, cold facts, the kind of facts that merely asked, "Did you place the silver teaspoon on the pantry shelf at 5:45 this afternoon, or not?" He acknowledged that their straightforward approach was sound, while his own methods, despite often yielding successful results, felt fundamentally flawed. They were never called liars or slapped down, nor did they find themselves tangled in an overwhelming web of metaphysical quandaries with little hope of escape. He steadied his thoughts. What had that subtle curve of her lips been suggesting? A sharing of something. Yes, something tied to pain. "You mean," he asked, "a sharing that's happening now?" "Perhaps, but mostly in the past. Do you believe, Lieutenant, that the dead remain emotionally connected to the living? And that, my poor friend," he chastised himself quietly, "is the consequence of your endless digging into people's secrets." "I've never considered it," she replied, "but I wish I could believe it. I'd like to believe in anything that offers proof of life after death." "So you feel certain about the finality of death?" "It's more a fear than a certainty." She nodded quickly, her expression earnest. "And for me, if only I could be sure." "So you want assurance that your sacrifice isn't in vain?" Lieutenant Williams spoke gently, sensing he was edging closer to the revelation he sought, the answer to the profound look she had given him in Mrs. Franklin's room. But the moment shifted. She suddenly stood. "Did you want the address book?" she asked. It seemed trivial, yet emotions lingered. They were always present, somewhere just out of reach, waiting to be seized again. "If you wouldn't mind," he replied. She approached the door of Mrs. Franklin's room, opened it, and stepped inside. Lieutenant Williams stood waiting outside. The investigation was getting bogged down in evasions. That was the problem with cases that involved people from higher social and intellectual circles. They often became tangled with complex nuances. Crimes in lower-class areas were marked by their brutality rather than sophistication, like a pack of animals where one jackal steals its meal in broad daylight. But those with refinement and intellect typically wore masks, hiding their defensive demeanor and social aggressiveness, which created barriers that were hard to break through. Smithers opened the door and handed him the small leather reference book that Mrs. Franklin had consulted while checking Dr. Jameson's phone number. "Thomas Hollander," she said. "The names are organized alphabetically." The door closed even before he could express his gratitude. It was a retreat from the unspoken intimacy of the moment. It felt as if she had shut not just the door to her room, but also the door to her secrets. He sensed that she regretted letting him in to some extent, not that she had revealed much, really. But there were faint glimmers of hope, tiny lights he could navigate toward on the troubled waters of her mind. He took the reference book and settled into a chair, starting from A and methodically working through the pages. When he reached H, he committed to memory the street and phone number of Hollander's residence. He continued to flip through the pages with little interest until, to his surprise, he stumbled upon the address and phone number of Nancy Norwich at the end of the M's. Chapter 10. 2:06 a.m. The stillness of a grave. Lieutenant Williams stood at the top of the stairs. "O'Brien," he called down. O'Brien glanced up from below. "Yes, Lieutenant." "Please send Hanson up here." "Yes, sir." As he waited, Lieutenant Williams found himself studying a painting on the wall. A Gauguin, he realized as he moved closer. His gaze swept over the corridor, taking in all the signs of immense wealth. Yet the young owner of it all was no blissful heir. Instead, he was a man both deeply resented and passionately adored. He recalled Mrs. Franklin, a tempest in her summer moods, Mrs. Quammen, a figure of emptiness, Smithers, teetering on the edge of some feverish madness, Hollander. Then there was Nancy Norwich. Who could truly say? And would anyone ever find out? What if, as Dr. Jameson had hinted, Franklin decided to remain silent? If the mysterious reticence repeatedly mentioned by both his wife and doctor continued to persist? "Lieutenant, sir," Officer Hanson reporting. Reluctantly, Lieutenant Williams tore his eyes away from the Gauguin. "All right, Hanson," he replied. "Follow me." They proceeded down the corridor and stopped outside Franklin's room. "Do you know what's happened here tonight, Hanson?" "From what I've gathered, sir, the man who was thought dead is now alive." "That's correct." Lieutenant Williams opened the door and gestured for Christian to join them. "When you two go back into that room," Lieutenant Williams instructed, "I want you to get a couple of chairs and position them just inside the bathroom doorway. Make sure you can keep an eye on the bed and this hallway door. If you need to talk, keep your voices low so you don't disturb the patient or the nurse. And from the moment she signals that he's regaining consciousness, don't say a word and stay still. The surprise of knowing you were there might upset his heart again." "Is that clear?" They all replied in unison that it was. "This hall door," Lieutenant Williams continued, "will be kept locked from the inside by the nurse. Each time she opens it, pay close attention. Keep an eye on anyone who enters the room, especially if they offer an excuse for being there. And when I say anyone, I truly mean anyone. For instance, if the nurse calls for a servant to fetch her some coffee, watch that servant closely until she leaves and the door is locked again. Speaking of coffee, you are not to accept any that might be offered to you while you're on watch." "I never drink coffee, Lieutenant," Christian replied. "Now, if it were a cup of tea." "If you get thirsty," Lieutenant Williams said firmly, "just drink some water from the tap, and don't eat anything at all. I don't want to return and find you both drowsy from knockout drops, with who knows what happening to Franklin. I'm not saying something will happen, but it could. Clear?" Once again, they assured him in unison that it was very clear. "Remember," Lieutenant Williams went on, "that you are primarily in a sick room under the complete authority of Dr. Jameson. You are not to interfere with anything he does or with any arrangements he makes during the night. Your role is to step in only if Franklin's life is threatened by someone approaching him. Do your best to physically subdue the attacker if you can, but if time is short, don't hesitate to shoot." "Even if it's a woman, Lieutenant?" Hanson asked quietly. Lieutenant Williams shrugged. "There's no such thing as gender or chivalry when it comes to murder." "Yes, sir." "Just to be clear, I'm outlining the worst-case scenario. Most likely, nothing will happen at all. You'll have a long, restless night, get stiff necks, and regret the day you joined the force. Now, there's one more thing to discuss, and it involves a man named Thomas Hollander. Dr. Jameson thinks it's important for a close friend of Franklin's to be by his side as the first person he sees when he wakes up. Mr. Hollander is that friend. I'll be reaching out to him soon to explain the situation and persuade him to come here. He's, of course, the exception to my earlier instructions. Leave him be. Don't interfere with him, but—" Lieutenant Williams paused, clearly emphasizing his point. "Watch him. Keep an eye on him, gentlemen, like two clever cats watching a wandering, near-sighted mouse. Should I repeat that?" "I understand, Lieutenant," Christian replied, confident that Hanson did too. "Then let's head inside, and you two should get settled for the night immediately." He opened the door, and they stepped in. Dr. Jameson's arrangements were thorough, and he was prepared to turn in. Nurse Murrow had received her instructions and would summon Dr. Jameson if Franklin showed any signs of regaining consciousness. Dr. Jameson joined Lieutenant Williams at the door. "There's not much more we can do for now, Lieutenant, except wait," he said. "All right, Doctor. I've informed my men about the situation." He nodded toward Christian and Hanson, who were stealthily slipping into the bathroom with 2 chairs. "I let them know you're in charge here and that they're to keep quiet and stay put." Dr. Jameson maintained a polite skepticism. "I suppose you know what you're doing, but it still seems like quite an extreme measure." "And maybe it is. I spoke to one of the maids regarding your stay, Doctor." "Yes, thank you. They directed me to my room. It's right above this one. I've also contacted one of Franklin's friends. I'm reaching out to him directly, and when he arrives, I'll send him up to you. You can tell him exactly what you need him to do, and then make sure he gets here safely, if you wouldn't mind." "Of course. Who is he, Lieutenant?" "Mr. Thomas Hollander. He lives on East 52nd Street. I've never heard of him, but there's no reason I should have." He cast a final glance toward Franklin, who lay faintly breathing on the bed. "The most reserved man I've ever encountered, Lieutenant." They stepped outside and shut the door. Nurse Murrow moved over to lock it, feeling, to put it mildly, quite anxious. Her life had not gone according to the glamorous portrayal of a trained nurse. There hadn't been any romantic patients whose sickly, intriguing brows she had soothed with a gentle touch. No grateful millionaire had ever offered her his heart or his family name, nor had any kindly old dowager passed away and left her a fortune. Instead, she had spent years dealing with demanding, irritable patients, nursing them through their discontent and facing the harsh realities of her profession, a barren landscape when it came to romance. This current case, however, seemed like a welcome surprise. Who knew what might come of it? It stirred the long-dormant desires of her romantic inclinations. Even if nothing came of it, no marriage, no generous bonus, it would at least provide her with something to ponder during those long, monotonous hours stretched ahead. She approached the bed and checked Franklin's pulse, jotting it down on her chart. She lingered by the doorway to the bathroom. "This is the oddest case," she murmured, "that I've ever dealt with." Christian glanced up at her with a look of concern. Hanson replied, "Yes, ma'am." "I suppose it's just another day at the office for you gentlemen." "Yes, ma'am." Nurse Murrow's broad shoulders tensed slightly. There was something stifling about being addressed so formally. She let it go and took her seat stiffly in an armchair. She adjusted a lamp so it illuminated her eyes more effectively. A floorboard creaked upstairs just once. That must be Dr. Jameson heading off to bed. What a remarkable man, a true luminary in his field. Perhaps a bit narrow-minded in some respects, but so accomplished, so admirable, a bachelor too, but what foolishness. A deep silence enveloped the house, the kind of silence that feels like a grave. Yes, she mused, exactly that, the silence of a grave.